Hello.
Hello.
Hi, how's it going?
Hi. Thank you. Really good. How are
hmm
you?
I'm good. I'm good. It's great to be back on the Behind the Future show. So thank you so much for joining, Sofia Gilliusson. For the ones that are not Swedish, I'm not pronouncing your name wrong. It's just a very Swedish way of pronouncing it, right?
It's not a very common name in Sweden either, so I've
No.
heard so many different variations.
What's the worst
Yeah.
variation you've heard of your last name? Let's just start there.
Oh, I have no idea, but
Yeah.
yeah.
We will take that
I
after.
can't even come up with
No, we
it.
will take that after the
Yeah.
after the episode today. But
I usually
but
get to
Sophia,
spell it.
oh yes, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I know the feeling of being named, or my name is Henrik, but after a year in the U.S., there's been a lot of different variations of my name. So that's very similar and familiar. But Sophia, thank you so much for joining today's episode. Today's episode is how to build a global map of your enterprise or of your organization, and something that both of us have been working with the last couple of years. We're very interested in as well. And I think it's great to have you joining, working for a European media company as well, like Schibsted, and learn more about how they work with enterprise architecture. But then also, of course, my favorite part, which is more the personal journeys within IT. So we're very excited to hear some interesting stories from you today. So thanks for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So maybe we should probably start with the first thing. So you work at Schibsted. You've been a consultant for many years.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, taking the technical background towards a more enterprise architecture role, more strategic. I worked with many architecture teams and CIOs the last couple of years. So I know that that's a very normal journey for very many in this field. But what I typically like to do is kind of go back a couple of years and try to
Yeah.
understand, what made you pursue IT, but then also, of course, in the later years, like enterprise architecture. So how did that happen?
Oh, yeah. Many years ago. Uh, well, actually, when I was, yeah, what 18, 19, IT wasn't even a concept back then. It's just a long time ago. But I always had easy to work with computers, even when they were quite new. And I thought it was always funny to do that. It's been an interest of mine. But then when I was to start my universal educations, I wasn't really sure what to do, but something technical. So I actually got a program on the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm for surveying and mapping, which turned out to be a very broad education containing everything from mathematics, physics, of course, programming and databases, but also uh, a lot of photography, ecology, geology,
Wow.
uh, macroeconomics, civil law, real estate law. So it
A
was like
generalist.
a very general education, and
Yeah.
uh, but it also contained, of course, the programming and so. So when I finished late 90s, it was in the middle of the IT boom. So we all of my classmates there we got drawn into the IT IT business,
Yeah.
so to speak. So I started as a programmer for about 10 years or so, uh, programming geographical information systems. So it's still a lot of mapping there, surveying and mapping. But then, of course, GIS systems are actually information system, IT systems, like any systems at all. So um, it also became more general IT
Yeah.
development.
What was your favorite subject during university? Because you had a lot of different courses. So what was kind of what was your favorite one?
Actually, I've always been interested in real different stuff. So it was actually a really good fit of the education to have all of these kind of topics to study. But I maybe think if if I didn't go the IT, and maybe geology would have been an interesting topic.
Yeah, yeah. I find it really fascinating when I talk to a lot of people that have kind of gone the IT route, if you will, like the technology route. And very often I see like the people that have been the best at their areas, they're very interested in things that is not related to technology and IT, but they find ways to kind of use philosophy, for example, and how to use that when they're applying new technologies and how they're working. So it's very interesting sometimes when you see that it's not just the technology in itself, but like it's the human component in it, which makes it quite interesting.
Yeah,
And when you started as a developer, what was kind of
yeah,
the what was the most important things for you back then when you were a developer? Like, what were some key things that you wanted to learn about? Of course, mapping, obviously,
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
which is why we have the conversation today, map of the enterprise. But what
Yeah.
were some of the biggest focus areas for you?
The biggest focus areas. Well, first, just learning to program and get really object oriented programming and that sort of thing. Get to learn how to do that first. But one of the things I did was program for a large company, forest company in Sweden. They're doing their mapping progress where they could plan and see their forest in a geographical UX. So that was one thing I did. But as I worked as a consultant, I did a really lot of different development works, um, from taking care of old landfill and in the best way. So you get to see a lot of different business
Yeah.
when you work as a consultant, which is really fun.
So when you were a consultant, like what
Yeah.
ambitions did you have? Like what type of industries did you work in mainly when you started as a consultant?
Forestry was one of my first, but also building and uh, land, and also public areas like the Swedish Agriculture Board. Um, yeah,
Yeah. And
quite
how
different areas actually.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting when you're a consultant, you're exposed to a lot of different industries, a lot of different markets, and I think a lot of people when they take that step, as you did as well, when you
Yeah,
went into some of the companies that you work with, right, and now you're kind of in the organization, so not
yeah,
just as a consultant, but you're in there as an
yeah,
enterprise architect. And I have a lot of questions about that, but on
yeah.
when you started that journey, like when was the first time you learned about enterprise architecture? Like the way that
Oh, yeah.
back
That
then, like how was
came.
that perceived?
That came actually quite some time after that. I think I worked as a programmer for maybe 10 years or so, and then I took the step as a solution architect in between because I was always interested in the bigger picture and how the programs were set up and how they were designed and so then I trained that and to learn how to model with UML and think a little bit more strategic. But then the last step to enterprise architecture was actually one of my a little bit higher manager came and stuck a booklet in my hands about information modeling, and he said, "Oh, I think this would be something you could be interested in." And I read it, and he was right. It was something that struck some sort of chord in me, and then I actually got the opportunity to take a certification in enterprise architecture and learn more about information modeling, process modeling, and how all of it uh, can be combined together in a strategic way. And so that was the step into enterprise architecture. But I think all of these steps, I mean, the step from the programmer to solution architect, it took some time, some kind of, okay, I have to see the information in another way. In the first, as a developer, I mainly saw, you have database, you have tables, SQL related. Then as a solution architect, you can see maybe the class diagrams and the how the abstraction there a little bit. And then you go as an enterprise architect, you got to see it a little bit even more high abstract level. Talk about how the general terms and words actually connect to each other and how they fit.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, it's been like steps that always open your mind a little bit, and you can see things from different perspectives. And
Yeah.
also been working as a consultant first, and then on the sort of the more of the customer side. Took the side when I worked at another big forest company in Sweden for about 7 years. So um, yeah,
The
you get to
forest
see
is
that. Yeah,
close
the
to your
forest,
heart.
yeah, it's close to my heart actually. Yeah,
Yes. And you're also calling
yeah,
in from the
yeah,
forest today, and I see you have a couple of colleagues
yeah,
behind you as well.
exactly.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting
Yeah,
because if you look at it today, right, with enterprise architecture, and of course I'm biased and you're biased because we work in the industry, but um, I do believe like enterprise architecture done in a way that connects the solution domains and the
yeah,
business domains. If that's the plan from day one, I think there's nothing more important, or there's never been a better time to go into that type of role and journey as an enterprise architect. I would say because, as we have talked about 100 times before, like every
yeah,
business now is a technology business, and every technology business is a business. Like everything is used by technology now.
yeah.
But how was that back in the days? So when you started, when you got your first kind of experience with enterprise architecture, have you seen some big differences in how it's perceived in the organization, how it's talked about? What was that initial response for you?
Um, yeah, well, I think traditionally it's been more also of a controlling process a little bit. Of course, you need to understand how everything works, but then you should be maybe a little bit of the police on top that structure is. But it's really haven't worked maybe ever that you can control without having the communication and really having the understanding from everybody. Uh, but that's been, I think, a little bit more accepted the last couple of years, that you don't have enterprise architecture that you push down on developers and on others. It needs to be cooperation and
Yeah.
transparency between everyone. So I think that has become more commonly spread way of doing things.
Yeah.
And actually, in Schibsted, where I work now, and I've been working here before also as well, it's a very decentralized organization, and it would never work on deciding from the top. Um,
Yeah.
so it's more of nudging and transparency, and see if you can share information and eventually get everybody to see hopefully the same view of how things work.
I have a lot of questions, but I know we just got a
Yeah.
question from the legend himself, Fred here, Jack in the Box. I think like basically that question for me is something that I really would like to get your thoughts on. Sophia, it's on the
Yeah.
fly here, it's on the spot, but he basically says, as an enterprise architect, what previous role do you find yourself leaning on most consistently? Great question, by the way, Fred.
Um, yeah. Well, uh, I have them all a little bit, but of course, development is it's been quite a long time since I really did that, and it has changed so much uh, since that. So I wouldn't really. Uh, yeah, I wouldn't keep up with any of those developers of today. But I can actually then have a little bit more technical language. I know what's important for them, and also solution architect. I know maybe what's important. So it's a thing that I can keep with me in communication with different type of stakeholders or people in the team, which I think is a really good experience.
And Fred, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to write them in the chat. But specifically on, and I think that there's a lot of things we're gonna try to cover today. And I know we typically have like 30 minutes, but then a Q&A, but then most likely there's questions throughout the conversation. But basically, like one of the things which I find fascinating, because the last couple of months I've been having a lot of conversations with media companies as well about that objective, specifically about trying to align the business architecture practice and the solution architecture practice. And that for a very long time, like, scatter documentation, all the, frequent pains and challenges that everyone has. Some of the key goals is being able to work in a decentralized way, in a way like you're not forcing hierarchy, you're not forcing chain of command, from one
Yeah.
central hub, but you're trying to kind of get the best people to actually be able to tackle the problems, and you're actually working together and doing knowledge sharing. But a lot of organizations, that decentralized approach works when you have a high level of trust and engagement and transparency. But what do you think about, like, what is, how do you get started? I know it's a very broad question, but kind of how do you get to that point where you actually get the wider organization to kind of buy into that knowledge sharing and engagement? It was a long
Yeah.
question,
And
but
it's
yeah,
not a really, I don't have the quick fix answer to
no,
that either, I'm afraid. I think it's actually working for a longer time and maybe earning the trust and earning the communication and showing that you uh, could be sort of a hub for all the other parts of the area. And uh, I don't have the target to be sort of the sort of single point of communication either. Uh, so actually, the target is that everybody can share information with each
yeah,
other independently and take uh, informed decisions based on the data that we have.
yeah.
So it's a little bit of showing and letting people know what other parts in the business are doing and what other, yeah, what do we provide, and uh, what do we have, and what, not inventing the wheel again is
Yes,
actually one big goal there. Uh,
yeah,
so
definitely.
yeah,
I have one thing which is interesting there is like, I think it's important that we try to unpack it, because I definitely see the same thing as well. It's kind of, instead of the architecture team being the ones that needs to have all the information in the organization, they should instead be like the facilitators, right? They
yeah,
should be
yeah,
the ones that puts the right people in contact with each other, and right, can get domain experts to actually contribute and actually share their experience. And I think that is a mindset shift for a lot of organizations. I think that's the
yeah,
biggest difference between the ones that are succeeding today versus the ones that are still holding that. And they talk about ivory tower mentality,
yeah,
and
yeah,
it's so overused. But
yeah,
basically, the ones that think they need to know everything to be able to do their job.
yeah.
But have you always had that mindset? Because I do think that I
Mhm.
still meet
Yeah.
organizations that don't have that mindset.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I've always had it because, yeah, I was sort of a little bit traditionally uh, brought up enterprise architecture wise in the beginning. Um, but also at that point, I worked at a quite comparatively small business. So you actually knew everybody and could talk to everybody uh, anyway.
Yeah.
So it was kind of still communication. Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
anyway, so but then when I actually started at Schibsted, I kind of realized that there's no way I can get everything, yeah, be on top of everything here. So it's just actually let the control go, but collect and be the facilitator for what we have. And over the years, we have built up sort of with the central capabilities that we have, that we can provide to all of our brands, because we have a lot of brands and they have a lot of independency of to doing their own kind of things. But then we have the central functions that are uh, enabling them to do what they can do, and we have them central because that's would be most efficient, not inventing the wheel again in that area as well. uh, and if we can optimize those also, and sharing what we have, they won't need to do it for themselves, and they can
Yeah.
concentrate on the business as well. So
What has
that's
been
one.
the? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, that.
I was just gonna say, what has been your biggest kind of learning coming into Schibsted? And I know you worked with Schibsted a couple of years before you joined as well. But
Yeah, yeah.
what has kind of been your biggest learnings coming into a larger media company like that?
Uh, Yeah, one has actually been that of letting go of the uh,
Control.
control, uh, but taking opportunities when they arise. Uh, Having a long-term plan on where you want to go with the data that you can collect from different sources and get, uh, and when you then get the opportunity to step on board and see you have use cases and you have parts in the business that are interested in contributing or interested in taking taking part of the data, then you should be ready to, I have this, come on, let's cooperate. So I think, that's one of my strategies to how to approach
Yeah.
enterprise architect, and to let it grow over time. And you will never become finished,
No,
ever.
it's not a start and end date.
uh, no.
No. And specifically on the solution architect team, like solution
Yeah.
architecture team versus the business architecture teams, for example. So how do you get them to work together? Because it's very difficult, right? When the enterprise architects and the business side, they have the kind of the global perspective. What is the strategy? How is the strategy being realized by different projects, the departments, and the people, PMO function? But then you have the solution architects that are much more on the specific design of a specific solution, and it's much more local and in the details, in the weeds. So
Yeah.
how do you get them to try to work together and be more aligned?
Yeah, I think one is actually making them talk and share their information between each other, both here in Schibsted and on works that I've been doing before in other places. I've been setting up this kind of communities where they can present what they're doing, and share, and then get feedback from the other ones, because they are peers in doing solutions, and they have good things to contribute with. So if you can get that communication, I think much is it's one. And then it's also, if they have heard about the thing and they know before hopefully before it's been deployed, they also can take that into account when they do some solution later on. um,
Yep.
and then also the map that we were also talking about here.
Yes.
A little bit we see, or we at Schibsted we see ourselves, like a big shopping mall with a lot of brands that they provide different kind of things to the customers. We have the media, we have digital marketplaces, and we have a lot of investment and startup brands, and they all do their businesses. But then we see the central functions like the shopping mall. They all can have their shops in the mall, and they can take advantage of the central facilities, like we have elevators, we have electricity, Wi-Fi, all the stuff they need to do the business, and take advantage of those central things that actually help them of concentrating on their own stuff. So that's how we see generally of the central functions in Schibsted and how we work.
Yep.
But I also think that our enterprise architect, that would be providing sort of the map or blueprints or whatever we have of this mall, so that the ones that need to do other parts of constructions in some areas of the mall, they have the rest of the prints and the maps actually to make decisions from.
Yep.
So that's one of my views for enterprise architecture in Schibsted.
And when it's so, because you mentioned a lot of things that I want to dive into
Yeah,
there, but
yeah,
the first thing, of course, the map in itself, because I find that interesting, is where do you start, right? Do you start strategically? Do you start operationally? Kind of, what's your experience there? So I really want to dive into that question. But before we just jump into it, I wanted to just ask one thing: is when you're a decentralized organization, if
yeah.
you will. So how kind of does the enterprise architecture team work with the different kind of business units? Or is it more like the team of EAs are kind of centralized, but then they work with the decentralized operation, if you know what I mean? So how do you guys work on a weekly basis when you're working with the different departments, business entities, and stuff like that?
Yeah, actually, we mainly focus on the central areas, but so that's where we do our mainly operational changes and into that architecture. But it's since this all of the things that we provide are being provided to the brands in a sort of customer relationship relation, we need to know what they yeah, what they require, and how to do that. But it's all a team effort with the enterprise architects. We have business relations. We have everybody has their ear out and seeing what is being required from the business. And also sometimes they of course come to us and say, "Oh, we need this kind of tool. Could you provide it centrally so that everybody can get it more efficiently?"
Yeah.
Um,
Cool. Then the key question I think a lot of people wanna know as well, the golden recipe for how to succeed to build a global map of your business.
ah,
Basically, so kind of
yeah,
where do you start, right? In a media company like Schibsted, where, because as I mentioned, like, do you start with the strategy, you focus on the high level objectives of the company, and then you kind of build up the operational information, if you will, the more technical domains from there? Or do you start with getting an understanding of your applications, your integrations, your catalogs, your databases? Like, where do you start now that you've been on both
yeah,
sides?
yeah. I actually start with what you have and what you can get hold of, and that's probably different in different organizations. Uh, in Schibsted, we started with uh, some version of sort of a service catalog, application catalog, and the intention at the beginning was to help the application owners to get a picture of how their application was set up and the area around that. So that was sort of the beginning of a seed to fill this map with one dimension, so to speak. But then after after a while, we also added the information dimension, and that could be built up since with the areas that you are working on, and be different levels of granularity within different areas. Uh, of course, that happens as well with sort of the application side. It could be some parts are very detailed, and we know quite uh, good. The quality of the data is quite good, but other parts are more of the, yeah, not
Yeah,
uncharted map.
yeah.
But I think start with what you have and combine it, and then gradually build it up. And then when you get the possibility to actually connect it to each other, it builds up a little bit, and the use cases that could take advantage of this new connected area will grow. And hopefully, in the end, people will come to you and say, "Oh, can you can you answer this question based on the data you have, and could we see that how these things are connected?"
Yeah.
So we actually started with the applications, then also integration has been a big part that we have documented. Then we have processes, information, uh, higher level. Then we will actually have we have the projects that influences the application and make changes, and uh, yeah, we start to connect and build the map bigger and bigger.
So of course this is what I think is what I've learned as well, is like find those quick wins and don't think
Yeah,
to start with everything, right?
yeah,
Don't have this long roadmap and expect everything to happen in day one, but like try to find those quick wins where you can get people to buy into what you're trying to accomplish very early, right?
yeah, yeah. I
Um,
also think that as we are using Ardoq, maybe not
yep.
a big secret, but
Ta-da!
but if you have the possibility to take from various sources automatically, could you take information from your HR system? Could you take information from your ticketing system? Different kind of system that has source of truth master data that you can combine. Uh,
Yep.
Take them automatically so you get a bigger part of the map at once. Uh, and also, don't be afraid to maybe fail and back a little bit, try it out. If it doesn't work right away, yeah, then leave it for a while, and then maybe the time will come later on where someone actually will take an interest in it and need to have that in a better quality, for example. So yeah, try
Yep.
it out, be persistent, but yeah, and then publish what you have.
Yep.
Let's say,
Yeah, and I think definitely the automation part is important. I think, of course, the data completeness
yeah,
is kind of important before you set it up. But I think the integrations and having that automatically synced as well also frees up your time where you don't need to do that manually, but you can focus more on the analysis and you can get more feedback from the team. And I think one thing which is really interesting, and this is not directly directed to IT, but so Eric Ries and his book, like the Lean Startup, which is where you get continuous feedback instead of like waiting for
Yeah.
everything to be perfect and then you go to market with it and then you were completely off and then you go bankrupt. Was a very extreme example, but I
Yeah.
do see some
Yeah.
parallel to like how it
Yeah.
is to be an EA team. Is instead of like building up all of these architecture artifacts, as they like to call them, like all of this information, all of these kind of data, and then they don't get feedback from the people that are actually on the business side before
Yeah.
they publish it, after several months. So I think having that same perspective, that it's better to have like an incomplete view but get feedback early so you can continue to improve on it instead of like waiting for everything to try to be perfect and then you start to interact with the leadership or with the business side and it's not applicable to what is actually happening on the ground. So
Yeah.
I definitely think that's important. The last thing that I wanted to do today is basically ask you if you had any, books or resources or videos or people in your career that has had an influence on you, that you look back on and you say, oh, that was actually something that changed my perspective, or that was actually quite useful in that part of my life. Like, do you have any key takeaways that you can share with us today?
Well, I can try, and yeah, except for that, maybe that small booklet that I got stuck in my hand about information
Hmm.
model that sort of changed everything into, yeah, starting to work with enterprise architecture, because well, it's a small booklet in Swedish. I can
Hmm.
recommend it to the Swedish part,
Yeah.
but maybe not to the rest of the world. Um,
There's no
but
translations on this one. We have to use Google Translate.
maybe that's the next business thing I can do.
Yeah.
No, but general, of course, you can probably find the information model. Um,
Yep.
and one of them is, or one of actually taking advantage of the model is a book called Domain-Driven Design, which is an old book. It's, can I show it here?
Hmm.
Uh, it's um, uh, it's about how the domain and the model actually is the center and how it's owned or perceived by the teams that are working with it. You need to have a common understanding of the vocabulary and how you nurture and take care of the model. Yeah. But maybe some parts of the book are quite outdated with the programming things, but I think the strategic part there still holds a few interesting patterns. They combine, and you can see the pros and cons of why you can choose some patterns, and in other cases other patterns,
Hmm.
um, on how to let the model be in focus. And also this has been sort of the inspiration for newer patterns like data mesh, and you're taking responsibility for the data you own, and you know the structure for it, and see other users of the data as sort of customers to
Hmm.
your data.
Yep.
So that is one, an oldie but a goldie. Then, of course, concerning information models, there are a lot of books out there with sort of standard information models, and they can be quite good to use, especially for if you tackling some sort of finance or CRM or sort of the central, quite mature areas. There are books, but one thing that I think is really quite newer approach to this is actually using ChatGPT
Hmm.
for this. I've been trying it out a little bit myself because, but they, uh, all of these, and alike, of course, other models. But since I think they have quite potential. They will, of course, not give you the total truth, but they are built on large language models and information models that actually is models how language is tied together.
Yeah.
So they are quite good at identifying how this area, uh, yeah, the vocabulary it's being used, and they can describe how it's used within an area. So yeah, try it out.
Yep.
Ask it about an area and get inspiration, get inspired for the areas that you actually model
Yeah.
there.
Just quickly on that
Yeah.
one, what is
Yeah.
what is one thing you think kind of, and I know people at Ardoq, they're going to laugh at me for saying this because I think artificial intelligence, it's great, right? ChatGPT as well is fantastic, but it's been such a buzzword right now. Like everything, as soon as we write AI, everyone's just like, wow, amazing, right? AI, AI, AI. So, but one thing I want to ask is,
Mm.
what is one thing you think AI could help an EA function with? Like the language model and the model and the holistic approach and the help with using or reusing what other companies have done before. But like, what is one thing you think kind of that will help architecture teams do better or more or yeah.
Yeah, of course. I must sing in the hype choir here a little bit, but
Mhm.
because I think we're just in the beginning of some transformation, and we will really not know how AI will be tools in our general days coming
Mhm.
up. But as for what I see in short terms, how we can use it, one must being information modelings, but I think also maybe uh, finding, training your or using your data that you have in your organization on an AI and finding, doing investigations, finding things in your data that you maybe didn't, uh, realize, or that could be another part that you can use it for. But I think we haven't just seen everything yet, and I'm excited about finding out and trying out the various tools that come up now and starting to be quite mature and
Mhm.
interesting to look at, and actually seeing how we can use it, because I think there will probably be ways that we can use it. Uh,
Yeah.
Maybe generate the map or the images in much more uh,
Mhm.
diverse and more user friendly ways. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, we're investing heavily into that now, and I think it's interesting to see when you put data behind it, and then you kind of start to see, okay, how can they help you visualize certain areas better, or like how can you create reports, or how can you create kind of stakeholder maps, or whatever it might be, in a way that makes more sense based on historical kind of experience as well. So I'm very passionate about that. I think it's going to be. I think yeah, I agree with you. I think we're at just the beginning here, and for me, ChatGPT has been a great way to write summaries actually after meetings
Mm,
because my English
yeah.
is still getting better. So that's been really useful for me, and I know it's been useful for a lot of people. So, Sophia, thank you so much for joining today. I hope it was fun.
Yeah, it was really fun talking to you.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think just wrapping up as well, Mark Thomas. Oh, I love that man. He's awesome.
Hmm.
And thanks for joining again, Mark. But he said one thing here, which I think we should include as well. Is basically he's
Yeah.
saying agree with the point being made that agility is important in enterprise architecture as it is in software development. And EA can't go away for 18 months to come back with architecture as the world will have moved on by that point, and the
Yeah.
architecture will not be relevant.
So
What do you think
true.
about that one?
Yeah. So true.
Yeah, we're in all in alignment here, Mark. So I think that really summarizes the episode quite well as well to kind of build a global map. Thank you very much, Mark. I only take dollars now because I'm in the US, so hopefully you will give me that in cash later. But yeah, I think that summarizes our conversation today as well. Is you need to be where the business are, and you need to get feedback initially. You can't hold back for 18 months, as Mark said, before you go out to the public and kind of validate your model and validate the work. So creating that close collaboration, and the architecture team being more as the enablers and facilitators than the ones that sits with all the information themselves. I think is extremely important. But I hope it's been fun today, Sophia, joining.
Yeah, it has. Really fun. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Likewise, looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yeah, you
Have a
too.
great day, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.